Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction. I'm very much honored to be here and to be the first speaker at this TEDx event here in Halle. Yeah, and the title of my talk is Pay for Skin or Pay to Win on Monetization in Free-to-Play Games. I would like to start out with a little question to you, to the audience. I hope I can see your hands. Which is, have you ever played, or who of you has ever played a game that was for free, a digital game or a video game that was for free to begin with? I think it's kind of more than 50%, if I can see that correctly. And who of those people who have played such a game at some point during playing then have decided to spend money in that game on in-app purchases like extra content or maybe some nice clothing for your game character or something similar? That's considerably less. Yes, that's exactly what I expected. So that was kind of to introduce the topic of my talk. So for decades, the public debate on games, so whenever you would see media coverage on games, there was a very big focus on violent content, first-person shooters that would allegedly make players more aggressive. But one aspect that you don't see so much in media coverage, and that I would like to talk about today, are the monetization models of games. So how do games make money? Some games might not look as gory or bloody or aggressive as other games, but still I think it is very much worth it to take a critical look at those games as well, because sometimes they have very subtle monetization models that can be seen at first glance, but I think can be just as critical. And in particular, I'm talking about free-to-play games. Free-to-play games are games, of those of you who are not familiar with it, that you can download for free. You can start playing them for free. And at some point during the game, during playing, the game will try to generate revenue by offering you microtransactions or in-game purchases, which means you can spend small amounts of money for extra content, skipping parts that you don't feel like, etc. I will go into that more in a bit. Just to make it a little bit more tangible for those people who are not familiar with this phenomenon, this is a playing sequence from a game called Jelly Splash from Berlin developer Wooga. It's a mobile game. It's a game in the so-called match 3 genre. Another very well-known game in that genre is, for instance, Candy Crush Saga by King. You might have heard of that. And here I'm playing through the levels of this game, and I'm at level 8. And I tried to finish the level with a fixed number of moves that was available to me, but I didn't manage. So here you see I have 0 moves left, and I kind of got stuck. And then the game asks me whether I want to continue playing. And if I say yes, I do want to continue, then I get 3 extra moves for 70 coins. But those 70 coins I have to buy, so if I click on that button, I end up here in the store, and I can spend 99 cents for these 70 coins, or I can also choose to buy at once 7,000 coins for 99 euros. This is just to kind of make it clear what types of monetization these games have. And then free-to-play games are by no means a small niche phenomenon. This is a chart from the leading Android apps in the Google Play Store worldwide as of April 2021 by revenue, meaning these are the top grossing apps in the Google Play Store. And I think many of you know that the Google Play Store has a lot of apps. Millions of apps are available in the Google Play Store. Some you can buy for money or for a fee, and others are for free. But the top grossing apps are all games. So these apps are all games, and they're all games that can be downloaded for free, so all free-to-play games. So the interesting question here is, if these games are for free, how can they actually make so much money? And that is one of the central questions I'm asking in my ongoing PhD research on this topic. And I won't go into the methodological details of my research, but one of the things I did to collect my data was conducting interviews with free-to-play game developers. And I asked them, how do they design the monetization in their games? The free-to-play monetization model was very controversial within the games industry, especially in the beginning, in the 2010s, roughly. Maybe mainstream media weren't covering it so much, but within the industry there was a very fierce discussion about how ethical this monetization model is. For instance, would it exploit players or make them addictive. And at the moment that you spend money within a game, what happens to the fairness? Could that be considered cheating? So that's why I turned to free-to-play game developers themselves, and I was just wondering how do they handle this tension? Because there was a lot of people were talking about it, but less people were actually asking them, so how are these games made? So that's kind of the central question also of my talk today. How are different monetization techniques assessed? What is considered good and bad monetization? And how do game developers differentiate between those two? So one term that was mentioned a lot by my interviewees was fairness. So all of my interviewees said one way or another they want their games to be fair. And then there were different kind of sub-principles that came out of this umbrella principle, basically, of fairness, and 3 of which I would like to address here in my talk. The first was that the free-to-play game developers want to offer players a perceived value for money. The second was that they want their games to be open and transparent. It should be clear to the player how the monetization in the game works. And then the third one was developers want to offer non-paying players just as much fun and entertainment in the game as paying players. So let me go a bit more deeply into each 3 of these. The first principle of offering perceived value for money meant basically that if someone decides to spend money in the game, it should at least subjectively, they have the feeling that this is an appropriate amount of money to ask for a virtual item. As you can imagine, this is a pretty artificial or arbitrary thing. How much do 3 moves in a game cost, right? It doesn't cause really any costs at the side of the developer. So is €1 an appropriate amount of money, or should it maybe only cost 1 cent or 10 euros? And a lot of my interviewees said it was a very hard balance and a big challenge to kind of hit the right pricing there. But they wanted, of course, that those people who were invested enough in the game to spend money also would get something in return that was worth it. So one of my interviewees was talking about how he made the first freemium game, free-to-play game, within his studio, and they were really struggling with finding this right balance. He said, when you spend, for example, $20 in the game, it feels like you only spent $2. It's because you can't really see why it is cool, and this is one of the most difficult things, to give the player the feeling of an added value. So the second principle was that of transparency. The developer said, we want our games to be fair in the sense that you should know exactly how the monetization mechanisms behind the game work. For instance, if there's a certain item that is very rare and counts down, you should exactly know that it's actually only that number of items and not more or less. So we should be transparent. Also, when there's a chance involved, the player should know what are the chances of winning something, for instance. One interviewee was a game designer at a big mobile studio. He described it as follows. I guess one of the things I don't do is lie to the players. That's the one line I've always drawn and always been able to draw. And then his third principle is about offering equal chances for non-paying players. You should know that, especially in the mobile free-to-play games, a very big majority of players will never spend any money. We have also very nicely seen this at the opening question. A lot of you have actually played free games, but far, far less have ever spent money in such games. So, for instance, the most popular mobile games, casual games that are easy to learn and easy, have like short playing sessions, over 90% of players will never spend any money. But nevertheless, the developer said, even though they won't support us financially, we still want them to enjoy our games just as much. You can argue whether this is a moral consideration, so they want just their games to be free and enjoyable by all, or maybe there's also commercial considerations behind this, because the more people who play a game, also the more in the end will convert into payers, and of course it will help for the visibility of the game. They might recommend the game to other people, for instance. But this was a value that a lot of my interviewees voiced, that yeah, this big non-paying player community should be enjoying the game just as much. You might have noticed also here that there's kind of a discrepancy, or at least a tension, between this principle and the first principle of adding, giving the player an added value who does spend money. Because of course, if you want this money to be well spent and being worth something, it's very hard not to disadvantage those who are not willing to spend that money. And my interviewees all kind of acknowledged this. There was a pretty hard balance for them to reach. So then I asked in the interviews, so what are possible strategies to kind of make sure these principles are present in your games and you don't violate those principles? So we talked about what are good monetization strategies and what are maybe questionable monetization strategies. And one generally considered good monetization strategy is to have players pay for cosmetics, which means you pay only for appearance. For instance, when you buy like a new outfit for your character, which is in game communities often called buying a new skin, hence in my title the phrase pay for skin. So this means the money you spend only makes you look better, but it won't give you any advantage when you're, for instance, trying to beat an opponent. And yeah, all of them said, okay, this is very fair. It's only those people who really want it who spend money, but at the same time, it's a very hard way of monetizing because those players really have to love the game a lot only to spend money on cosmetics. Another strategy that was mentioned by a lot of interviewees was that of paying for skipping time. So having the players pay to get through the game quicker and skipping, for instance, tedious parts or just plain waiting, which you would also describe as kind of the using of players' impatience. I'd like to illustrate that with a little example. These are 2 screenshots from a game called Boom Beach by Finnish developer Supercell. And it's a strategy game for mobile as well. I play it on a tablet here. And this is my headquarters, and I can upgrade my headquarters to level 4. Currently it's level 3. And I can either wait for 2 hours for it to improve, or I can hit this button immediately, and I have to pay 62 diamonds to get it immediately. Then I chose waiting. So here you can see I still have 1 hour and 59 minutes left, but I can still at any point hit the lightning here, and I can pay in order to have it immediately. So the game developer said this is a very good way of monetizing because you can choose to do so, but if you're patient enough, you can also just wait. But again, it's also kind of a gray area because what is an appropriate time to wait is again very subjective, and maybe 2 hours is okay by me, but what if the game would what if it would last 2 weeks to wait for my headquarters to level up? So again, it was a challenge also to still keep it fair in this respect. And then the counterpart of these good monetization strategies, I also asked what is then bad monetization? And kind of an umbrella term for this is pay to win. Pay to win is condemned by a lot of gamers and also within the games industry. Everybody kind of tries to avoid it. And pay to win means basically that you can buy your way to the top. You can get really good by just maybe buying the most expensive weapon or just going up in the ranks by paying. Again, avoiding this was very hard, and also because it's a little bit at odds with this principle of giving someone an added value when they spend money, but it shouldn't be making you better in the game, basically, or bringing you further within the game. And then there's one final mechanic or monetization type that I would like to address here, because it's, I think, a very interesting one, and it's pretty much still controversial also within the games industry. And some of you might have heard of it, because it's about loot boxes or loot crates. And beginning of 2018, there was a lot of media coverage actually about these loot boxes. Because they would resemble gambling, they would have to be regulated as gambling, because the principle behind loot boxes is that you buy a certain set of items that has some kind of value within the game, but you don't know up front exactly what you're going to get. So you spend this money and you open a loot box, and it could be something very rare or very valuable, but it could also be something that you already have a lot of and you don't really need in the game. The interviewees talked about this a little bit as well, and said it's, again, a gray area to know exactly what is still fair in this respect, and that it gets very easily into the direction of gambling and maybe exploiting players, because they said, of course, it's nice, we all like this feeling of excitement that we don't know what we're going to get, and we open this box. And this is also shown by the YouTube videos you can find about this activity of opening such boxes. But at the same time, you have to be very careful, and you have to make sure also that these rare items are actually in there. And one way of solving this problem is also to have more transparency about the chances you actually have of getting certain items. So I would like to come to a conclusion here. And I hope to have shown you that this is an aspect of games that might not be so visible when you only look at it at face value, when you only look at game screenshots. And you might think, this is a very colorful game. But I hope I have made clear that it is worth taking a second look and also critically assessing such games and looking exactly at what the monetization mechanisms behind those games are. And that the devil is very much in the detail in this area. So, kind of my take-home message today is, in judging and picking games, we should not only account for game content and graphics, but include monetization mechanisms in order to make informed decisions about which games we want to play. Thank you very much.